Well, this will be the second video in my build vlog of the Gundam Hangar Bay. Simply because, as I've stated before, I didn't want to do just a generic white or black backdrop, which may unfortunately have to be the case for many bigger kits, because frankly, this project is just too expensive to be feasible anymore at this point. I mean, really, the bases alone, the parts I'm using to paint and modify, I've probably wasted $200 on those. There's a nice estimate, more like $240, just buying the parts needed to paint this. So after the second kit comes and I waste another couple days painting it, I'll call it quits there and just live with what I've got, and then probably get like a photo booth thingy, because frankly, I'm not building a 1/160th scale hangar. To hell with that, man. It's just too much money. And frankly, with the way YouTube is, it's not very lucrative to, blow this type of cash on something specifically only made for videos. As I guess I should state for people, the only reason why I'm making this hangar bay is to make my videos more interesting for people to look at, more immersive. Otherwise, I wouldn't take on this project. So, back on point. As you can see, I've already put on some decals, and I skipped forward because, frankly, we all know how to use waterslide decals. And I got to give this to the Chinese. At least the Chinese give you waterslide decals. Mini Gundam kits from Bandai come with stickers, unless like it's a Verka or a special edition or something. And that really sucks. So after you follow the basic sort of stuff you do with Gundam model kits, paint, clear coat, decal, we're moving on to oil-based paints. Now, this is a technique that I've seen done on battleships, so on and so forth. It's oil streaking. Now, I don't necessarily have the gist of it yet. I have a running idea. The thing is, you get like, I don't know, a toothpick or something. You put little tiny dots, as small as you possibly can. And also, probably be best to work with your oil paints within 30 minutes of putting them on cardboard or something when all the oil seeps out. The linseed oil. Or else it becomes kind of tacky and it's hard to take off and it's hard to place. And then you mash it on. And before you know it, you have a couple of spots, as you see on my work here, that are just gigantic dabs, which you don't want because it takes much longer to work on. Much longer to deal with. And it's a real pain in the ball sack, to be honest. Now, once you've finished your placement with the colors you choose to use, or, use any you want, you could use a whole ton because you're streaking, it kind of doesn't matter because they're all going to blend anyway. And once you start blending, sometimes it works together. And we take a brush, which I didn't show, I apologize, and we get some oil thinner. You could also use enamel thinner. I've heard people do enamel thinner. I'll have to try it later, but I was using oil paint thinner. Now, here's the thing. Get the Mona Lisa oil paint thinner. Don't buy any other oil paint. The Mona Lisa oil paint thinner actually allows me to streak without eating into my clear coat, like the other oil paint thinner I used from Artisan 502, I think they're called. I forgot. I like their oil paints, but the thinner is just too abrasive. It even got through my lacquer, which is the last thing you want. But then again, if you're weathering things, it could look cool, which I found, but it's a real slippery slope. And then you dab the brush inside the oil thinner, and then you dry it off in a napkin, which I didn't show. But don't worry, you can find more detailed tutorials on scale warship building, jet planes, World War II planes. That would be the place to actually learn from, because that's where I pick up the idea. I also use some really loud colors. I think that's like Starship. No, that's not Starship Grease. That's some weird sort of aqua color that's supposed to simulate some sort of starship fuel or something like that. I don't even know. I just figured I'd use it because it was so wild and funky and bright. And we're just streaking. Streak until you find that you like what you're doing. Overall, it's supposed to be barely visible. Like it's something you see, but not so heavy, because the heavier it is, the uglier it is. The more overbearing, and it sort of draws too much attention to itself. And then it just looks like something a kid did. And you really want to try and avoid that mistake because you want your stuff to look realistic or cool, not like someone just spilled a whole bunch of paint on your floor panel. And I must admit, watching this is quite boring. It's a very slow process, and it's only for people who have the time, energy, and patience, I should say. This is a project I've been working on and off for the last couple weeks. So, to give you an idea, I mean, it could be done quicker by someone who has no other obligations to fulfill, like someone who definitely Like, if this was your job, then you could probably have this done in maybe a week, I think. But then I could be wrong. You know, I'm not a professional painter or a commission worker. Forgive my crass voice. I just recently woke up and I'm dreadfully tired. And we are just streaking away. With the brighter colors like yellow and orange or rust, you really got to work your way around that, including like Starship Fill. That's one of the colors I used. I like it a lot, but it's very, very noticeable. That's a hard one to get, but if you nail it down right, it looks right. I think the mistake I made on these parts is I used too many colors, trying to just find what I thought worked well. But then again, I guess in a real world situation, you can't really account for what type of colors would be there. I don't know, considering Starship bases don't really exist right now, so I'm kind of playing it by ear. At this point, you may notice that I took out a napkin and just started trying to wipe away the streaking. It's much easier with more enamel, it's much easier with more oil thinner on your brush to wipe this completely away, like it'll completely disappear. But as I said before, you use too much oil thinner, it can affect your paint job. So you got to be cognizant of that, or else, you know, you could really mess up days, if not weeks of work that you've put into your project. I don't know what I should do, if I should just leave these playing with some sort of music in the background, because it is a long process, this sort of oil streaking. It's very, very long. I mean, this is the condensed version. I think I had like 2 or 3 hours of footage, and I tried to wheedle it down to 17 minutes. That's why I completely cut out the water slide decal parts, because frankly, that's a bit more time added. After you've pretty much come to the conclusion that you like where your weathering is, or if you got tired of doing it, that happens to me quite often, we can move on to some paint chipping. I use 2 different methods of paint chipping. One is where I do the Boba Fett method, where you paint one color, add some rubber, liquid rubber, paint another color, add more liquid rubber in a very sporadic thing, and then layer the colors. And once you're done, take a razor blade and peel them off. That would probably give one of the most authentic weathering looks you can get, but it's ultra time consuming. Very, very time consuming. And I didn't really want to bother with something that intricate on something like this. It's supposed to be a project that originally I intended to just paint the base and, you know, leave it in pristine condition, say screw it. Considering most YouTubers who review Gunpla either use like a lighting backdrop, or if they do use like one of those plastic based things, they don't even bother to paint them. So already I had kicked the competition in the nuts just by adding a little paint. But typical me, anything I do, I tend to go overboard. But point being, we're doing chipping the easy way, which is basically painting in and then, you know, adding a multitude of colors. The rule of thumb I usually do would be black, steel, or gunmetal gray if you got it. But mainly stick with steel. It's a darker sort of metal color. And then silver, aluminum, or a sort of silver chrome, but not like a reflective chrome. And you just sort of add little notches of the silver chrome. You know, you use less as you go down the color variation I just gave you. Like black would probably be the largest point. Steel would be about medium size. And then your silver or aluminum color would just be very, very fine, a very small amount. So that way it pops when you actually see that little bit of bright metal color. I've noticed this in cars and other sort of metals that I saw at junkyards. It's the thought process I had when I looked at this. I'm no painter by any means. I'm sure there are better ways to paint chip damage, believe me. But once you get it right, you're set in stone. Now in here you'll notice I only use black and silver simply because the part I'm painting itself is already steel. So I didn't know how well that would translate to go from a steel to black, then another steel, then silver. And I figured less is more. Always remember that. Less is more when painting weathering. In my personal opinion, I see a lot of weathered suits and stuff, and they look beautiful, but they're so overly weathered. It looked like the mobile suit was abandoned for like 50 years in all sorts of elements and junk, and then one day someone just got in and started piloting it, you know? Like they weather the mobile suits and stuff to the point of where it's like a 57 Chevy that they never bothered to restore. They just dropped an engine in and drove it. It never made that much sense to me. I always viewed weathering mobile suits like your car. Now, if you've had a car for 10, 20 years, I have a 20-year-old Mustang. I think my uncle has a 50-year-old one. And his is in better shape than mine, but his is a classic. It's a 302 fastback. Or was it a 303 fastback? I can't remember the number. Probably 303. Anyway, I noticed with cars that people have had for a long time, they'd have little nicks and dings. You know? Most people will try and keep up the cars. I believe most mobile suit pilots would try and keep their mobile suits in pristine condition. I mean, you don't look at Harrier jets. Well, Harrier jets have been discontinued. Well, you don't see jets on like a Navy ship that are in complete disarray, like rusted wings and whatnot, heavily filthy. So that's the thought process I have with my weathering. It's a little too probably pristine for most people, but I feel it's more realistic in that sense. Now, you're painting a mobile suit for a resistance group that has very limited supplies, and it would make more sense. But now I'm just talking about my own personal aesthetics. And as you can see, it's a very slow process. Are we still on the same panel? My God, I had no idea I put this much time into it. It's a good thing while painting Gunpla and all of these scale model things, you kind of go into this sort of Zen mode where your brain kind of clicks off. And the only thing you're paying attention to is what you're doing. And before you know it, you've pissed away a couple hours and you're behind schedule on a multitude of things. And all you can think is, I'm a fucking idiot. Now that should do it for me. I mean, at this point, I think you've got the gist of where we're at in this weathering tutorial. Well, at least for here. Hopefully someone could learn something from this, but I highly doubt it, as I'm not really good at giving tutorials, and everything I'm doing, I'm basically playing it by ear, which I think is something many people should do. You should just sort of answer to that higher power within yourself. I know it's weird to say, but it's sort of like this feeling you get when you're doing certain things, where it's like you're doing it and it just comes to you. I say just let whatever you're doing come to you. And try not to be too discouraged by it, because overall the goal here is to find some sort of relaxation in a world full of, I can't even think of a good word to use, degradation, separation, subterfuge, rage, scum, villainy, politicians, taxes, etc. With this, it's supposed to be your sense of freedom, your little oasis in a dead sea of lost thoughts and ideas, companies trying to market to you, and so on.